The fever had taken everything from Penelope Sutton except her breath, and even that came shallow and rattling in the thin mountain air of Park City, Utah. She stood at the edge of the dried-up creek bed behind the abandoned miner's shack. She had been squatting in for 3 weeks, her dress hanging loose on a frame that had once been softly curved, but now showed every rib, every jutting bone. The tin cup in her trembling hand caught the first drops of rain that had fallen in a month, and she tilted her face skyward, letting the moisture touch her cracked lips. September 1877 had brought an early cold snap to the Wasatch Mountains, and Penelope knew with a certainty that settled deep in her marrow that she would not survive another winter. She was 22 years old and living on borrowed time. The rainwater tasted of dust and desperation. She drank it anyway, forcing herself to swallow even as her stomach cramped in protest. Food had been scarce for longer than she cared to count. The last proper meal she remembered eating was back in Salt Lake City, before the consumption had taken her mother, before her stepfather had decided a sick woman's daughter was worth more sold than fed, before she had run with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring sewn into her hem. That had been in July. August had passed in a haze of walking, hiding, and slowly starving. Now September rain fell on her upturned face, and she wondered if this was how her story would end, alone in the mountains with not even a proper grave to mark her passing. The sound of hoofbeats on the muddy trail made her freeze. Penelope pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the shack, her heart hammering against her breastbone. She had avoided the main parts of town, knowing that her stepfather's reach extended far and his anger ran deep. A man who dealt in gambling debts and human flesh would not take kindly to merchandise that ran away. The horse drew closer, and she caught a glimpse of the rider through the rain, a tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat and a duster that hung past his knees. He rode past without seeming to notice the shack, but something made him pause. He turned his horse in a slow circle, his head tilted as though listening for something she could not hear. Penelope held her breath. The rain fell harder now, drumming on the tin roof of the shack with a sound like distant thunder. Her vision swam at the edges, dark spots blooming and fading with each beat of her weakening heart. She pressed her palm flat against the wall to steady herself, but her legs gave out anyway. She went down hard, the tin cup clattering from her hand and rolling away across the mud. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was the sound of boots splashing through puddles, coming closer. She woke to warmth. Not the feverish heat that had been her constant companion for weeks, but genuine warmth from a fire crackling somewhere nearby. Penelope opened her eyes slowly, expecting to find herself still lying in the mud, perhaps already crossed over into whatever came after. Instead, she found herself looking up at rough-hewn wooden beams and a ceiling that did not leak. She was lying on something soft, a real bed with a quilt pulled up to her chin, and the smell of coffee brewing filled her nose with such sudden intensity that tears sprang to her eyes. Easy now. The voice came from her left, low and careful. You have been out for near about 6 hours. Penelope turned her head, the movement sending a wave of dizziness through her skull. The man sitting in the chair beside the bed was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of smoke. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. He wore a simple work shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. There was a gentleness in the way he held his coffee cup that seemed at odds with the gun belt hanging on the hook by the door. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, her throat raw and aching. My place. About 2 miles outside Park City proper. Name is Quincy Yates. He set his coffee cup aside and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Found you passed out in the rain. You were burning up with fever, so I brought you here. Doc Morrison came by a few hours ago. He left some medicine and said you need rest and food in that order. I cannot pay you. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I have nothing. Did not ask you to pay. Quincy Yates stood and moved to the small stove in the corner, where a pot of something that smelled like heaven was simmering. When is the last time you ate something that was not rainwater? Penelope tried to remember and found she could not. Days blurred together when you were starving. I do not know. He ladled broth into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a spoon. Start with this. Your stomach will not take anything heavy right off. Doc says you have been half-starved for weeks, maybe longer. She pushed herself up to sitting, and the world tilted dangerously. Quincy set the bowl aside and caught her by the shoulders, steadying her with hands that were calloused but surprisingly gentle. Slow. Everything slow for now. You are not going anywhere until you are stronger. Why are you helping me? The question came out sharper than she intended, born of weeks of running and hiding and trusting no one. You do not know me. Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite read. Maybe that is exactly why. You need help and I can give it. Does not need to be more complicated than that. He handed her the bowl and spoon. Drink. We can talk after you have gotten some food in you. The broth was simple, just chicken and vegetables and salt, but it tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten. Penelope forced herself to eat slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down. Quincy sat back down in his chair and watched her with those steady gray eyes, not speaking, just present. When she had finished half the bowl, her stomach began to rebel, and she set it aside with a shaking hand. That is good for now, Quincy said, taking the bowl from her. You can have more in a few hours. Doc left some powders for the fever. I will mix them with water. I need to leave. Even as she said it, Penelope knew it was impossible. She could barely sit upright, let alone walk. It is not safe for me to stay. Not safe how? Quincy turned to look at her, and there was something in his gaze that made her think he already suspected the answer. Someone looking for you. She hesitated, weighing her options. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, but neither could she afford to lie to the man who had probably saved her life. My stepfather. He will be searching for me. If he finds me here, he will hurt you for helping me. Let him try. There was no bravado in Quincy's voice, just a simple statement of fact. You are safe here, Miss Sutton, Penelope Sutton. She pulled the quilt tighter around herself. And I am not safe anywhere. Not while he is still looking. Quincy mixed the medicine powder into a cup of water and brought it to her. Drink this. Then you should rest. We can figure out the rest later. There is no rest for me. But even as she said it, exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. She drank the bitter medicine and lay back down, her eyes already closing. He will find me. He always finds what he is looking for. Then he will have to come through me first. Quincy pulled the quilt up around her shoulders. Sleep, Penelope Sutton, you are safe tonight. She wanted to argue, to tell him he had no idea what he was up against, but the medicine was already pulling her down into darkness. The last thing she felt was the weight of another blanket being laid over her, and the distant sensation of being warm and protected for the first time in months. When Penelope woke again, sunlight was streaming through the window, and the smell of bacon frying made her stomach clench with hunger. She pushed herself up to sitting, moving slowly this time, and found that her head felt clearer than it had in weeks. The fever had not broken completely. but it had subsided to a low simmer rather than the raging fire it had been. She looked around the cabin properly for the first time, taking in the neat but sparse furnishings, the rifle mounted above the door, the books stacked on a small shelf beside the fireplace. This was the home of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. Quincy was at the stove, his back to her, and she took the opportunity to study him. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, and there was a preciseness to his movements that spoke of someone who did not waste energy on unnecessary motion. He was tall, probably a few inches over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean strength that came from hard work rather than idle time. "You are staring." He said it without turning around, but she could hear the amusement in his voice. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I apologize. I was just trying to figure out what manner of man finds a half-dead stranger and brings her home. The kind who was raised by a good mother, I suppose." He turned, a plate of bacon and eggs in his hand. "Think you can handle solid food?" Her stomach answered for her, growling so loudly they both heard it. Quincy smiled, and the expression transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. He brought the plate to her, along with a fork and a cup of what smelled like real coffee. "Go slow," he cautioned. "Your body needs time to remember how to process food properly." Penelope ate carefully, each bite a revelation of flavor and substance. The eggs were cooked perfectly, the yolk still soft, and the bacon was crispy at the edges. She had not realized how much she missed the simple pleasure of a hot meal until this moment. Quincy sat in his chair and watched her, sipping his own coffee, not speaking until she had cleaned her plate. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." She met his eyes, searching for some hint of ulterior motive and finding none. "I still do not understand why you are doing this. Does there need to be a reason beyond basic human decency?" Quincy set his cup aside. "You were in trouble and I helped, that is all. In my experience, men always want something in return." Something dark flickered across his face. "Then your experience has been with the wrong kind of men." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the morning sun. "I am not going to hurt you, Penelope. And I am not going to hand you over to whoever is looking for you. But if you want to leave when you are strong enough, I will not stop you. The choice is yours." The simple offering of choice, something she had not had in so long, nearly undid her. Tears burned at the back of her throat, but she forced them down. Crying was a luxury she could not afford. "What do you want me to do?" "Rest, eat, get your strength back." Quincy turned to look at her. "When you are well enough, we can figure out what comes next. But for now, just focus on healing. I cannot impose on your hospitality forever. Not asking you to, just asking you to let yourself be helped for a few days." He crossed his arms over his chest. "Doc Morrison will be back this afternoon to check on you. Until then, you should stay in bed." Penelope wanted to argue, but the truth was she could barely sit upright without feeling dizzy. Her body was a betrayal, weak when she needed it to be strong. "How long was I sick before you found me?" "Doc says probably a few weeks, based on your condition. You had a bad fever and you were severely malnourished. Another few days and—" He trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Another few days and she would have died alone in that shack. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she just felt numb. Death had been her constant companion for so long that it had lost its ability to frighten her. What scared her was the idea of hope, of believing that things might actually get better, only to have that hope ripped away. "Tell me about Park City," she said, changing the subject. "I know it is a mining town, but that is all." Quincy seemed to understand what she was doing and let her redirect the conversation. "Silver mining, mostly." The Ontario mine struck a major vein a few years back, and the town has been growing ever since. It is rough, like most mining towns, but there are good people here too. Families, businesses, a church, even a school. And you, what do you do? I have a small ranch about 5 miles from here. Raise cattle, some horses. I come into town when I need supplies or when someone needs an extra hand. Found you on my way back from town yesterday. A rancher. She studied him with new eyes. That explained the calluses, the easy confidence with animals she could hear in the corral outside. Do you live here alone? Just me. Had a partner for a while, but he moved on to California last year. Been on my own since then. He moved back to the stove and poured himself more coffee. Gets lonely sometimes, but I prefer the quiet to the chaos of town life. I used to live in Salt Lake City. The words came out before she could stop them. It was loud and crowded, and I hated it. But now I think I would give anything to be back there, if only because it meant my mother was still alive. Quincy's expression softened. I am sorry for your loss. She died of consumption in July. I nursed her for months, but in the end it was not enough. Nothing was ever enough. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. My stepfather remarried within a week. He needed a new wife to run his household, you see, could not be bothered to wait for a decent mourning period. And that is when you ran. It was not a question, but she answered anyway. He tried to sell me to pay off a gambling debt. Told me I should be grateful, that the man who bought me was relatively young and not completely hideous, as though that made it acceptable. The memory made her hands curl into fists. So I ran. I took nothing but my mother's ring and the clothes I was wearing, and I ran. He is still looking for you. He will not stop. My stepfather is a man who does not like to lose, especially when money is involved. The man he promised me to paid in advance. Now my stepfather owes that debt or owes me. I am the collateral. She looked down at her hands, at the 2 prominent bones and the dirt still crusted under her nails. I thought I could make it to California, maybe find work in San Francisco. But I ran out of money in Salt Lake City, and I have been living on scraps and hope ever since. You were living on rainwater and borrowed time. Quincy's voice was quiet, but you do not have to anymore. Penelope looked up at him, at this stranger who had shown her more kindness in one day than she had known in months. Why do you care? Because everyone deserves a chance at a future. Everyone deserves fresh starts. He held her gaze. And maybe because I know what it is like to feel like you are out of options and out of time. Before she could ask what he meant, there was a knock at the door. Quincy moved to answer it, and an older man with a gray beard and a black medical bag stepped inside. This had to be Doc Morrison. How is our patient this morning? The doctor asked, setting his bag on the table. Awake and eating solid food, Quincy reported. Fever seems lower. Good, good. Doc Morrison approached the bed and pulled up a stool. Miss Sutton, I am going to examine you. Just need to check your lungs and your pulse. Make sure that fever is truly on its way out. Penelope submitted to the examination with as much grace as she could muster. The doctor listened to her breathing, checked her pulse, and looked at her eyes and throat with practiced efficiency. Finally, he sat back and nodded. You are a lucky young woman. Another day or two and the fever would have done permanent damage, if not worse. As it is, you need rest, regular meals, and time. The malnutrition will take weeks to fully recover from, and you will be weak for a while yet. But with proper care, you should make a full recovery. How long before she can travel? Penelope asked. Travel, Doc Morrison frowned. Miss Sutton, you can barely sit upright. I would not recommend attempting any kind of journey for at least a month, possibly longer. A month. Her heart sank. She could not impose on Quincy's generosity for that long, and her stepfather would surely find her by then. I have plenty of room, Quincy said from where he leaned against the wall. "And I could use the company. You can stay as long as you need." "You do not know what you are offering. When my stepfather finds me, if he finds you, we will deal with it then." Quincy's voice was firm. "But for now, you need to focus on getting well. Everything else can wait." Doc Morrison looked between them with something that might have been approval in his eyes. "Quincy Yates is a good man, Miss Sutton. You are in safe hands. I will leave more medicine and check back in a few days. Follow his instructions about rest and food and you will be just fine." After the doctor left, Penelope lay back against the pillows, exhaustion pulling at her despite the fact that she had done nothing but eat and talk. Quincy noticed and moved to the window, pulling the curtain partially closed to dim the light. "Sleep," he said. "I will be right outside if you need anything." "Quincy," she spoke before she could lose her nerve. "Thank you for everything." He paused at the door and looked back at her, and in that moment Penelope saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was not pity or obligation, but something deeper, something that spoke of understanding and shared pain. "Get some rest, Penelope. We will figure out the rest together." The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm that Penelope had not known existed. She would wake to the smell of coffee and breakfast, eat under Quincy's watchful eye, and then rest while he went about his work. He never went far, always staying within shouting distance, and he checked on her regularly. In the afternoons, if she felt strong enough, he would help her walk around the cabin, building her strength slowly. In the evenings, they would talk, sharing stories and pieces of themselves in the firelight. She learned that Quincy had grown up in Missouri, the son of a schoolteacher and a farmer. His mother had died when he was 16, and his father had followed a year later, leaving Quincy and his younger sister to fend for themselves. His sister had married and moved to Oregon, and Quincy had drifted west, working various jobs before settling in Utah Territory and starting his ranch. He had never married, never even come close, though Penelope suspected there was a story there he was not telling. He learned that Penelope had spent her childhood in Boston, the daughter of a merchant who had died when she was 10. Her mother had remarried out of necessity rather than love, and the family had moved west when her stepfather's debts caught up with him. Penelope had learned to make herself small and quiet to avoid her stepfather's attention, but after her mother died, there had been nowhere left to hide. "What would you have done in California?" Quincy asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Penelope was wrapped in a blanket in the rocking chair, and he was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with practiced ease. "I do not know exactly. Find work as a seamstress, maybe, or a cook. Anything honest that would let me survive on my own terms." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I know it sounds foolish, running toward nothing with no real plan. It sounds brave." He looked up from his whittling. "It takes courage to walk away from everything you know, even when what you know is bad. Or it just means I was desperate. Those things are not mutually exclusive." He set aside his work and leaned forward. "Penelope, I have been thinking. When you are well enough, if you still want to go to California, I will take you. Make sure you get there safely." The offer caught her off guard. "That is weeks away, possibly months. I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking, I am offering." His gray eyes were serious. "But I have another idea if you are willing to hear it." "What kind of idea?" "Stay here, in Park City." He held up a hand before she could protest. "Hear me out. You are a good cook and the food at the boarding house in town is terrible. Mrs. Chen, who runs it, is getting older, and she has been looking for help. I could introduce you, maybe help you get a position there. It would give you a place to stay and honest work, and it would keep you close enough that your stepfather might not think to look here. He is expecting you to run far, not to settle in a mining town in the middle of Utah Territory." It was a good plan, practical and thoughtful, but it also meant staying in one place, putting down even shallow roots, and that terrified her. What if he finds me anyway? Then we deal with it. But Penelope, you cannot spend your whole life running. At some point you have to stand still long enough to build something worth keeping. And if what I build gets destroyed, then you build again. He reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. You are stronger than you think. You survived weeks alone with nothing but rainwater and will. You can survive this too. His touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fever or cold. She looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his tanned skin and her pale, sickly pallor, and felt something shift in her chest. This was dangerous territory, letting herself care about someone, letting herself imagine a future that included more than just survival. But the temptation was there, growing stronger with each passing day. I will think about it, she said finally, and he smiled. That is all I ask. 3 weeks after Quincy found her in the rain, Penelope walked into Park City proper for the first time. She still tired easily, and her clothes hung loose despite the regular meals. But she was stronger now, strong enough to sit a horse for the 2-mile ride into town. Quincy rode beside her on his big bay gelding, pointing out landmarks and introducing her to people they passed. The town was rougher than Salt Lake City, with wooden sidewalks and buildings that looked like they had been thrown up in a hurry, but there was a vitality to it that she found appealing. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a 2-story structure near the center of town, painted white with blue trim, and a sign that read "Clean Rooms and Hot Meals" hanging above the door. Quincy tied their horses and helped Penelope down, his hand steady on her waist. She was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his body and the way his eyes lingered on her face. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, and they went inside. Mrs. Chen was a small Chinese woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked Penelope up and down with a gaze that missed nothing, then turned to Quincy. "This is the girl you told me about." "Yes, madam. Penelope Sutton, this is Mrs. Chen." "You know how to cook?" Mrs. Chen asked Penelope directly. "Yes, madam. My mother taught me. I can also clean and manage household accounts." Mrs. Chen circled her slowly. "You are too thin. Sick. I am better now. Fever." "Yes, but it has broken." "Good. Cannot have sick girl in my kitchen." She stopped in front of Penelope and crossed her arms. "I give you job, you work hard. No laziness, no stealing, no entertaining men in your room. You cook, you clean, you help with guests. In return, you get room, meals, and small wage. Understand?" "Yes, madam, I understand." "You start tomorrow. Quincy, you bring her in morning. 6 o'clock, not 1 minute later." "Yes, madam," Quincy said, his lips twitching with suppressed amusement. As they left the boarding house, Penelope felt lighter than she had in months. She had a job, a place to stay, and the promise of a fresh start. It was more than she had dared to hope for. Quincy helped her back onto her horse and they rode out of town at an easy pace. "Mrs. Chen seems formidable," Penelope said. "She is. But she is fair and she takes care of her people. You will be safe there. Because of you." She looked over at him. "You arranged all of this." "I just made an introduction. You are the one who impressed her. Mrs. Chen does not hire people she does not think can do the work." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. Penelope found herself memorizing the landscape, the way the mountains rose sharp against the blue sky, the smell of pine and sagebrush on the wind. This place was so different from Boston, from Salt Lake City, from anywhere she had ever been. It felt like the edge of the world, wild and untamed and full of possibility. "Quincy," she waited until he looked at her. "Why are you doing all of this? And please do not say it is just basic human decency. This is more than that." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "5 years ago, I was in a bad place, drinking too much, fighting, making terrible decisions. I was angry at the world and taking it out on everyone around me. Then one day, a stranger pulled me out of a bar fight I was losing and took me back to his place. He sobered me up, gave me a job on his ranch, and showed me that I could be more than the worst thing I had done. His name was Thomas York, and he saved my life. He died 2 years ago, and before he did, he made me promise that if I ever had the chance to help someone the way he helped me, I would do it. So that is what I am doing. I am keeping my promise to a good man who saw something in me worth saving." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes. "I am sorry you lost him, me too, but his lesson stuck, and maybe this is what he meant. Maybe you are the reason I found that shack when I did, the reason I looked back. Do you believe in that? Fate, destiny?" "I believe that sometimes the right people find each other at the right time. Whether you call that fate or luck or something else, I do not know, but I am glad I found you, Penelope." "I am glad too." The words felt inadequate for the depth of what she felt, but they were all she had. When they reached the cabin, Quincy helped her down from her horse, and this time his hands lingered on her waist, his thumbs brushing against her ribcage. She looked up at him, at the gray eyes that had watched over her for weeks, and felt something warm and terrifying unfurl in her chest. This was more than gratitude, more than simple friendship. This was the beginning of something that could break her heart if she let it. "I should start packing my things," she said, stepping back. "If I am starting work tomorrow." "Right. Yes." Quincy cleared his throat and stepped back as well. "I will help you." That night, Penelope lay in the bed that had been hers for 3 weeks and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would move into the boarding house and start her new life. She should have been excited, relieved, hopeful. Instead, she felt a hollow ache in her chest at the thought of leaving this cabin, of not waking up to the smell of Quincy's coffee, of not spending evenings by the fire listening to him talk. Somewhere in the past few weeks, this place had become home, and Quincy Yates had become far more important to her than she had ever intended to let anyone become again. There was a soft knock at the door. "Penelope, you still awake?" "Yes, come in." Quincy pushed the door open but stayed in the doorway, as though he did not quite trust himself to come closer. "I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed for tomorrow." "I do, thank you. Good. That is good." He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign he was uncomfortable. "Listen, I know you are moving into town, but that does not mean we cannot still see each other. I come into Park City at least twice a week for supplies. I could stop by the boarding house, make sure you are settling in all right. I would like that." The words came out softer than she intended. "And if you ever need anything or if something happens, you can send word. I will come, no matter what, Quincy." She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. "I need to tell you something," he tensed. "What is it?" "I think I am starting to care about you, more than I should, more than is probably wise." The confession hung in the air between them. "And that terrifies me, because everyone I have ever cared about has either died or hurt me, and I do not know if I can survive that again." Quincy crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt beside the bed, taking her hands in his. "I care about you too, Penelope. Have since the day I found you, maybe even before that in some way I cannot explain. And yes, caring about people is terrifying, but it is also the only thing that makes life worth living. What if my stepfather finds me? What if he hurts you because of me? Then we will face it together. But I am not going anywhere, and neither are you, not anymore." He reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen. "You were living on borrowed time, Penelope, but I am giving you a future if you want it. Fresh starts, new beginnings. All of it for as long as you will let me. I do not know how to do this, how to trust someone again. We will figure it out together, one day at a time." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. "I am not asking you to have all the answers right now. I am just asking you not to run from us because you are scared. Can you do that?" She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, leather and wood smoke and something uniquely Quincy. "I can try. That is all I need." He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, then stood. "Get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." After he left, Penelope lay back down, her heart racing and her mind spinning. She had not planned for this, had not wanted to let anyone in. But Quincy Yates had slipped past her defenses without even trying, and now she was in the terrifying position of having something to lose again. She could only hope that this time, things would be different. The next morning, Penelope moved into the boarding house and started her new life as Mrs. Chen's assistant. The work was hard, starting before dawn and ending long after sunset, but it was honest work and she threw herself into it with everything she had. She cooked and cleaned and learned to manage the constant flow of miners and travelers who passed through Park City. Mrs. Chen was exacting but fair, and Penelope found herself thriving under the older woman's watchful eye. True to his word, Quincy came into town twice a week. Sometimes he brought supplies. Sometimes he had business at the bank or the general store, but he always found time to stop by the boarding house. They would sit on the front porch in the evenings, talking and watching the sun set over the mountains, and slowly, carefully, Penelope let herself believe that maybe this could work. October gave way to November, and the air grew colder. Snow dusted the peaks of the Wasatch Mountains, and the miners began talking about closing some of the higher elevation claims until spring. Penelope had gained weight, her cheeks filling out and her skin losing its sickly pallor. She felt stronger than she had in years, both physically and emotionally. Mrs. Chen noticed the change and began giving her more responsibility, eventually putting her in charge of the kitchen entirely. "You have good instincts," Mrs. Chen said one afternoon as they prepared dinner. "You know how to make food stretch, how to make simple things taste good. This is important skill. My mother taught me that. She said food is love made visible." Penelope smiled at the memory. "She could make a feast out of nothing. She taught you well. You will make good wife someday." The comment made Penelope's cheeks flush. "I am not thinking about marriage." "No." Mrs. Chen gave her a knowing look. "Then why does Quincy Yates come to town so often? Before you arrive, I see him maybe once a month. Now he is here twice a week, always stopping by, always asking about you." "A man does not do that unless he is courting. We are friends, friends," Mrs. Chen snorted. "You young people always making things complicated. He likes you, you like him. This is simple." "Nothing about my life is simple, Mrs. Chen." The older woman's expression softened. "You are worried about your stepfather. Quincy told me when he asked me to give you job. He said you needed safe place, somewhere to start over. I give you this because I see you are good girl with bad luck. But bad luck does not last forever, Penelope. Sometimes, good things happen too." Before Penelope could respond, the front door of the boarding house burst open and a man stumbled in, his clothes torn and blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Mrs. Chen rushed to his side, and Penelope grabbed clean towels and water. The man was mumbling something about a mine collapse, about men trapped under tons of rock and timber. The next few hours were chaos. The boarding house became a makeshift hospital as injured miners were brought in from the collapsed shaft. Penelope worked alongside Mrs. Chen and Doc Morrison, cleaning wounds, boiling water, holding men down while the doctor set broken bones. The work was grim and exhausting, but there was no time to think, only to act. It was nearly midnight when Quincy appeared in the doorway, his face streaked with dirt and his clothes torn. Relief flooded through Penelope at the sight of him. She had not realized how worried she had been until that moment. "Are you hurt?" she asked, rushing to his side. "No, just tired. I was helping with the rescue efforts. We got most of the men out, but 3 did not make it." He swayed slightly, and she caught his arm. "Sit down before you fall down. When is the last time you ate? This morning, I think." She guided him to a chair in the kitchen and quickly put together a plate of food. He ate mechanically, his eyes distant, and she recognized the look of someone who had seen too much death in too short a time. When he finished, she brought him a cup of coffee and sat down beside him. "Tell me," she said quietly, and he did. He told her about the moment the shaft collapsed, about the scramble to dig out the trapped men, about the 2 he had pulled free and the 3 they had been too late to save. He told her about the wives who now had to be told they were widows, about the children who would grow up without fathers. Penelope listened without interrupting, her hand resting on his arm, offering what comfort she could. When he finally fell silent, she said, "You saved 2 men today. Remember that. You cannot save everyone, but you saved 2, and that matters." "Does it?" His voice was raw. "I keep thinking if we had been faster, if we had dug a little more to the left, maybe nothing. You did everything you could. The rest is not on you." She turned his face toward hers. "Quincy, you are a good man. A good man who saved my life, who saves lives, who keeps promises to people even after they are gone. Do not let the weight of what you could not do erase the value of what you did." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression cracked. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and she felt him shaking. She wrapped her arms around him and held on, letting him take what comfort he needed. They stayed like that for a long time, 2 people who had both known loss and survival, finding solace in each other. When Quincy finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clear. "Thank you, always." She meant it with everything in her. He reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Penelope, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you. Maybe already have fallen. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I cannot help it. You are the bravest, strongest person I have ever met, and when I am with you, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Her breath caught. "Quincy, you do not have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, I needed you to know that you are loved. Completely, truly loved." Penelope looked into his gray eyes and saw nothing but honesty and hope. The walls she had built around her heart, the ones that had kept her safe and isolated for so long, finally crumbled. "I love you too. I think I have since the day you brought me to your cabin and gave me a future when I thought I had none left." Quincy smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and when she did not, he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, Penelope felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in years. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we figure out the rest together. One day at a time, just like I promised." "One day at a time," she repeated, and for the first time she believed it. December brought heavy snow to the mountains and a different kind of trouble to Penelope's door. She was in the kitchen of the boarding house, preparing breakfast for the guests, when Mrs. Chen came in with a worried expression. "Man outside asking about you, says he is your stepfather." Ice flooded Penelope's veins. "What does he look like?" "Tall, gray hair, expensive clothes, mean eyes." Mrs. Chen gripped her arm. I tell him you not here that I never hear your name. He does not believe me. He is offering money for information. He will not stop until he finds me. Penelope's hands were shaking so badly she had to set down the knife she was holding. I have to leave. I have to go now before he finds proof I am here. Where you go? Winter is here. Roads are dangerous. I do not know, but I cannot stay. If he finds me, he will drag me back, and I will not let that happen. She untied her apron with fumbling fingers. Please tell him nothing. And if you see Quincy, tell him I am sorry. Sorry for what? Penelope, do not be foolish. Let Quincy help. But Penelope was already moving, grabbing her coat and the small bag of belongings she kept in her room. She could not risk staying, could not risk bringing Quincy into this mess. Her stepfather was dangerous, and he would not hesitate to hurt anyone who got in his way. Better to run now, alone, than to wait and see who got caught in the crossfire. She slipped out the back door of the boarding house and into the snowy street. The cold bit through her coat, and she pulled it tighter, her mind racing. She needed to get to the stable, needed to get a horse, but she had no money for one. Maybe she could walk, head south toward the next town and hope she could stay ahead of Penelope. She spun around and found herself face to face with her stepfather. Gerald Sutton looked older than she remembered, his face lined and his hair more gray than brown. But his eyes were the same cold blue she remembered from her nightmares. Behind him stood a younger man, probably in his 30s, with the build of someone who made his living with his fists. Did you really think you could run from me? Gerald asked, his voice deceptively mild. I have been tracking you since July, girl. You have led me on quite the chase. I am not going back with you. Penelope backed up a step, her heart hammering. You do not have a choice. You are my property until your debt is paid, and Mr. Thornton here has already paid a considerable sum for you. He is eager to collect what is his. The younger man smiled, and it made Penelope's skin crawl. Been waiting a long time for you, Miss Sutton. We are going to have a real good time, you and me. I would rather die. That can be arranged too. Gerald took a step forward. Now you can come quietly, or Davis here can make sure you come. Either way, you are getting on a horse and leaving with us. Penelope looked around desperately for help, for anything, but the street was empty. Everyone was inside, sheltering from the cold. She was alone, cornered, and out of options. Then she heard the sound of boots crunching through snow, and a familiar voice cut through the air like a knife. The lady said no. Quincy stepped into view, and Penelope had never been so glad to see anyone in her life. He was dressed for the cold, his coat unbuttoned despite the snow, and there was a revolver on his hip that she had never seen him wear in town before. This does not concern you, Gerald said, his eyes narrowing. She is telling you no, that makes it my concern. Quincy positioned himself between Penelope and her stepfather, his stance casual but ready. You can leave now, or we can have a problem. Your choice. Davis took a step forward, but Quincy held up a hand. I would not if I were you. I am not in the mood for a fight, but I am more than willing if you push me. Do you know who I am? Gerald demanded. I have connections, resources. You are just some cowboy. Maybe. But I am a cowboy with a gun and a real strong dislike for men who hurt women. So again, you can leave, or we can see what happens next. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Gerald smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. This is not over. She is mine by law, and I will have her back. You are just delaying the inevitable. We will see about that. Quincy did not move until Gerald and Davis had mounted their horses and ridden out of sight. Then he turned to Penelope, his expression fierce. Are you all right? How did you know? Her voice came out as a whisper. Mrs. Chen sent her grandson to find me. I rode hard to get here. He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face against his chest, shaking with reaction. "You are safe, I have got you. He will not stop, he will come back. Let him try. Next time we will be ready." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "But Penelope, you cannot run from this. If we do not deal with him now, he will chase you for the rest of your life. We need to find a way to end this." "How? He says I am his property, that the debt is legal." "Then we make it not legal. Come on." He took her hand and led her toward the sheriff's office. Sheriff Cole Harrigan was a weathered man in his 50s with the kind of face that suggested he had seen it all and was not impressed by much. He listened to Penelope's story without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "That is a nasty business. Problem is, technically speaking, your stepfather might have some legal ground to stand on. If he had guardianship of you and entered into a contract on your behalf before you were of age, it could be considered binding." "I am 22 years old," Penelope said. "I am of age. You are now. But how old were you when this contract was made?" She thought back, trying to remember the exact date. 21. It was just after my birthday. That is of age in most territories, which means unless he had power of attorney over you, which he could not get without your consent, then the contract is not legal. He is trying to bully you into thinking you have no options. Sheriff Harrigan pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. "I am going to draft a statement saying that you are an adult of sound mind, that you did not consent to any contract, and that any attempts to forcibly remove you from Park City will be met with arrest. It is not perfect, but it should give you some protection. Thank you, Sheriff." Penelope felt a weight lift from her chest. "I do not know how to repay you. No need. Part of the job is protecting folks from men like your stepfather." He handed her the document. "Keep this with you. If he tries anything again, show him this and tell him to come talk to me. And if he does not listen, you come find me. I have dealt with his type before." As they left the sheriff's office, Penelope felt like she could breathe again. It was not a perfect solution, but it was more than she had hoped for. Quincy walked beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back, a protective gesture that made her feel safe. "What if he does not believe the sheriff?" she asked. "Then we make him believe. But Penelope, you need to understand something. I am not going to let him take you. I do not care what it costs me. I do not care what I have to do. You are not going back to that life." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Why? Why are you doing all of this for me?" "Because I love you. Because you deserve a life where you are not looking over your shoulder every day. Because the thought of losing you makes me feel like I cannot breathe." He cupped her face in his hands. "And because you gave me something to fight for again. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You changed that. You changed everything." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but for once they were not tears of fear or despair. "I do not know what I did to deserve you. You survived. You kept fighting when most people would have given up. You were living on rainwater and borrowed time, and you refused to let that break you. That is more than enough." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them. "What? Marry me? Not because of your stepfather, not because you need protection, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Because when I think about the future, the only thing I see clearly is you," he smiled. "So what do you say, Penelope Sutton? Will you marry a cowboy and let him give you fresh starts and a future worth living?" She laughed through her tears. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." Quincy picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her properly, deep and thorough and full of promise. People on the street stopped to stare, but neither of them cared. They had found each other in the middle of nowhere, two broken people who had been given a second chance, and they were not going to waste it. They were married a week later in the small church on the edge of town. It was a simple ceremony with Mrs. Chen and Doc Morrison serving as witnesses and the local preacher officiating. Penelope wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, and Quincy wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his eyes never leaving hers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Penelope felt her heart overflow with joy. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Mrs. Chen providing a feast that seemed impossible given the short notice. Half the town showed up, miners and shopkeepers and families, all wanting to celebrate. Penelope was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, by the way this rough mining town had welcomed her and made her one of their own. She had come here expecting nothing and had found everything. As the evening wore on and guests began to drift away, Quincy pulled her aside. "Ready to go home, home." She tested the word and found it fit perfectly. "Yes, I am ready." They rode out to Quincy's ranch under a sky full of stars, the snow crunching under the horses' hooves. The cabin looked warm and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney and lamplight glowing in the windows. Quincy had spent the past few days preparing it for her, adding curtains to the windows and a new rug to the floor, small touches that made it feel like a home rather than just a place to sleep. He helped her down from her horse and swept her up into his arms, carrying her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates, Mrs. Yates." She smiled against his neck. "I like the sound of that." Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the table was set with dinner that must have been prepared earlier in the day. Quincy set her down gently, his hands lingering on her waist. "I know this is not what you imagined when you dreamed about your wedding day. No big party, no fancy dress. It is perfect." She placed her hand over his heart. All of it. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." He kissed her then, soft and slow, and she felt herself melt into him. This was what she had been running toward all along, even when she did not know it. Not just safety or survival, but love. Real, honest, overwhelming love that made everything else fade into insignificance. They spent their wedding night wrapped in each other's arms, learning the geography of each other's bodies, whispering promises and secrets in the darkness. Quincy was gentle and patient, treating her like she was made of something fragile and precious, and when they finally came together, it felt like the missing piece of a puzzle clicking into place. This was what it meant to be whole, to be loved, to be home. In the morning, Penelope woke to sunlight streaming through the window and Quincy's arm wrapped around her waist. She turned in his embrace and found him already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Good morning, wife," he said. "Good morning, husband." She pressed a kiss to his jaw. "I could get used to this. Good, because I am planning on keeping you for a very long time. Forever, if you will have me." Forever sounds perfect. They spent the next few months settling into married life. Penelope continued to help Mrs. Chen at the boarding house a few days a week, but most of her time was spent at the ranch, learning the rhythms of life in the mountains. Quincy taught her to ride properly, to shoot, to read the weather and the seasons. She taught him about books and music, about the world beyond Utah territory. They were building something together, a life that was uniquely theirs. Gerald Sutton did not give up easily. He made 2 more attempts to confront Penelope, but each time Sheriff Harrigan intervened, making it clear that any further harassment would result in arrest. Eventually, word reached them that Gerald had returned to Salt Lake City, his tail between his legs and his reputation in tatters. The man he had promised Penelope to, Mr. Thornton, had apparently decided the pursuit was not worth the trouble and demanded his money back. The whole affair had cost Gerald considerably, both financially and socially, and Penelope found she did not feel sorry for him at all. Spring arrived in a rush of melt water and new growth. Penelope discovered she was pregnant in April, the realization coming one morning when she could not keep down her breakfast. Doc Morrison confirmed it, and Quincy's joy was so complete and overwhelming that it made her cry. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest and eat and avoid any heavy lifting, until she finally had to tell him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I am pregnant, not dying," she said one afternoon as he tried to carry a basket of laundry for her. "I can manage. I know, I just want to make sure you and the baby are safe." He set the basket down reluctantly. "I cannot help it. The thought of something happening to you terrifies me." She took his face in her hands. "I am strong. You know that better than anyone. I survived months alone with nothing but rainwater and borrowed time. I can survive having a baby." "You are right. I know you are right." He pulled her close. "I just love you so much, and the idea of losing you, you are not going to lose me. I am not going anywhere." She kissed him softly. "We are going to have a baby, Quincy. A child who will grow up knowing what it means to be loved and safe and wanted. That is a gift, and I refuse to let fear steal the joy of it. You are right, as always." He pressed his hand to her still flat stomach. "I cannot wait to meet this little one." Their son was born in November, during the first snowfall of the season. The labor was long and difficult, but Penelope refused to let it break her. She had survived worse, and she would survive this too. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes, she felt a love so fierce and complete that it took her breath away. "What should we name him?" Quincy asked, cradling the baby with the kind of reverence usually reserved for holy objects. "Thomas." The name came to her without thought. "After the man who saved you, Thomas Yates." Quincy's eyes filled with tears. "You are sure?" "I am sure. He gave you a future and you gave me one. It feels right to honor him this way. Thomas Yates it is." Quincy kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "Thank you, Penelope, for everything. For being brave enough to survive, for letting me love you, for giving me this family. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are mine." She reached up and pulled him down for a kiss. "My cowboy who gave me a future and fresh starts." The years that followed were not always easy. There were hard winters and lean times, sickness and loss and the constant challenges of life on the frontier. But through it all, Penelope and Quincy held on to each other and the life they had built. They had 3 more children, 2 daughters and another son, and the cabin that had once held just Quincy expanded to accommodate their growing family. Penelope never forgot what it felt like to be hungry and desperate, to be living on borrowed time with no hope for the future. Those memories kept her compassionate, kept her willing to help others who found themselves in similar situations. Over the years, the Yates Ranch became known as a place where people could find help if they needed it, no questions asked. They took in drifters and runaways, orphans and widows, offering food and shelter and second chances to anyone who needed them. Thomas York's legacy lived on in them, in the way they paid forward the kindness that had been shown to Quincy all those years ago. And Penelope, who had once been a girl living on rainwater and borrowed time, became a woman who gave others the same gift her cowboy had given her: a future, fresh starts, and the promise that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always hope for something better. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Quincy took Penelope back to the spot where he had found her, the abandoned miner's shack behind the dried-up creek bed. It was fall again, the air crisp and the leaves turning gold, and the shack had long since collapsed into ruin. But the place still held meaning for both of them. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had not looked back that day?" Quincy asked, his arm around her waist. "Sometimes, but not with regret, just with gratitude that you did." She leaned into him. "You saved my life that day, Quincy. But more than that, you gave me a reason to want to live. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything." He turned her to face him, his gray eyes as clear and steady as they had been that first day. "I was existing before I met you, just going through the motions. You made me want to live again, made me want to build something that mattered. You were the one living on borrowed time, but you ended up saving me just as much as I saved you. Then we saved each other." She kissed him, soft and sweet and full of the love that had sustained them through 25 years of marriage. "And we will keep saving each other for as long as we have." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the place where their story had begun. Two people who had been given a second chance and had made the most of it. The wind whispered through the trees, and in the distance, they could hear the sound of their grandchildren playing, the next generation of Yates who would grow up knowing what it meant to be loved and safe and wanted. Penelope thought about the girl she had been, standing in the rain with a tin cup in her hand, believing she had nothing left to lose. That girl had been so scared, so certain that her story would end alone and forgotten in the mountains. But she had been wrong. Her story had not ended that day. It had only just begun. Because sometimes, when you are at your lowest, when you are living on nothing but rainwater and borrowed time, the universe sends you exactly what you need. For Penelope Sutton, that had been a cowboy named Quincy Yates, a man with a promise to keep and a heart big enough to save a dying stranger. He had given her a future when she thought she had none, given her fresh starts when she believed she had run out of chances, and given her a love that had sustained her through everything life threw at them. And in return, she had given him a reason to keep his promise to Thomas York, a family to love and protect, and a partner who understood that true strength came not from never falling down, but from getting back up every single time. Together, they had built something beautiful out of the ruins of their separate pasts, a life that was messy and imperfect and absolutely perfect in every way that mattered. As they walked back toward the ranch, hand in hand, Penelope looked up at the mountains that had once seemed so forbidding and found them beautiful. This place had taken everything from her and then given her everything back, multiplied beyond measure. She had come to Park City, Utah, as a refugee from her own life, and she had stayed as someone who had finally found where she belonged. The sun was setting as they reached the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Their children and grandchildren were gathered on the porch, waiting for them, and the sight of all those beloved faces made Penelope's heart swell with joy. This was her legacy, not the hunger and fear and desperation of her past, but the love and family and belonging of her present. Quincy squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking about?" "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive. I am thinking that every terrible thing I went through was worth it because it led me to you. I am thinking that this life we built together is better than anything I could have imagined for myself." She smiled up at him. "I am thinking that I love you, Quincy Yates, and I am grateful every single day that you were the one who found me in the rain. I am the lucky one." He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You were the one who was strong enough to survive, brave enough to trust me, and foolish enough to fall in love with a cowboy. All I did was recognize a good thing when I saw it and refuse to let it go." Their youngest grandchild, a girl of 5 with Penelope's dark hair and Quincy's gray eyes, came running up to them. "Grandma, Grandpa, are you coming inside? Mama says dinner is ready. We are coming, sweetheart." Penelope scooped the child up and settled her on her hip. "Let us go eat." They walked into the house together, into the warmth and light and laughter that filled every corner. This was home, built not just with wood and nails but with love and sacrifice, and the determination to create something better than what they had been given. It was a home that welcomed strangers and took in strays, that celebrated the good times and weathered the bad, that stood as a testament to what was possible when two people decided to build a future together. That night, after dinner had been eaten and dishes washed and grandchildren tucked into bed, Penelope and Quincy sat together on their porch, wrapped in a quilt and watching the stars come out one by one. The air was cold but not bitter, and the smell of pine and wood smoke filled the night. "Do you have any regrets?" Quincy asked quietly. Penelope thought about it, really thought about it. Did she regret the hunger, the fear, the desperate flight from Salt Lake City? Did she regret the fever and the weakness, the weeks of living in that abandoned shack? Did she regret any of the hard times that had brought her to this moment? "No," she said finally. "Not a single one. Because every step, every choice, every terrible thing led me here to you, to this life, and I would not trade this life for anything. Not even for a life where you never had to suffer, not even then, because suffering taught me what it means to be strong, it taught me how to survive, and it taught me how to appreciate what I have now." She turned to look at him. "You gave me a future, Quincy. But I gave myself the strength to claim it. We are partners in this, equal in every way that matters. Partners." He clinked his cup of cider against hers. "I like the sound of that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen and the stars grow brighter. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and one of the horses in the corral whinnied in response. These were the sounds of their life, familiar and comforting, and Penelope wrapped them around herself like a second blanket. She thought about the girl with the tin cup, standing in the rain and waiting for the end. That girl seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime, and in a way she was. The woman Penelope had become bore little resemblance to that frightened, starving girl. She was stronger now, wiser, more certain of her place in the world. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a pillar of her community. She was someone who mattered, someone who made a difference. And it had all started with a cowboy who looked back, who chose compassion over convenience, who saw someone in need and decided to help. Quincy Yates had given her a future and fresh starts, and she had taken those gifts and built something extraordinary with them. Their love story was not the neat, tidy fairy tale of storybooks, but it was real and hard-earned and absolutely beautiful. As the night grew colder and sleep began to tug at them, they went inside to their bedroom, the room they had shared for 25 years. Quincy helped her out of her dress, his fingers fumbling with the buttons the way they always did, and she laughed softly at his concentration. Even after all these years, he approached her with the same reverence and care he had shown on their wedding night, and she loved him for it. They climbed into bed and lay facing each other, their hands intertwined between them. In the darkness, Penelope could just make out the shape of Quincy's face, the features she knew as well as her own. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. Always have, always will. Promise me something, anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how much time we have left, we will never take this for granted. This life, this love, this family. Promise me we will remember how lucky we are. I promise." He pulled her closer, tucking her against his chest. "Every single day, Penelope. I promise." She closed her eyes and let herself sink into sleep, surrounded by warmth and love and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The girl who had been living on rainwater and borrowed time was gone, replaced by a woman who had been given a future and had seized it with both hands. And the cowboy who had saved her had become her partner, her love, her everything. Their story could have ended in tragedy, with Penelope dying alone in that shack, unmourned and forgotten. But it had not. Instead, it had become a story of hope and redemption, of second chances and the transformative power of love. It was a story that would be told for generations, passed down through their children and their children's children, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of light. Years later, when Penelope and Quincy were both old and gray, their bodies worn but their spirits still strong, they would sit on that same porch and tell their story to anyone who would listen. They would talk about the rain and the fever, the abandoned shack and the cowboy who looked back. They would talk about the boarding house and the wedding, the children and the grandchildren, the life they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work. And when people asked them what the secret was, how they had managed to build such a strong and lasting love, they would smile at each other with the kind of understanding that only comes from decades of partnership. "There is no secret," Quincy would say. "Just two people who decided to fight for each other every single day. And who were too stubborn to give up," Penelope would add. "Even when things got hard." "Especially when things got hard," Quincy would correct, and they would laugh together, the sound rich and warm and full of life. Because that was the truth of it. Love was not always easy or convenient or simple. It was work and compromise and showing up even when you did not feel like it. It was choosing each other, again and again, through sickness and health, through good times and bad, through every challenge life threw at you. It was being a partner in the truest sense of the word, bearing each other's burdens and celebrating each other's joys. Penelope Sutton had come to Park City, Utah, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's ring sewn into her hem. She had been living on rainwater and borrowed time, waiting for death to find her in the mountains. But instead, she had found Quincy Yates, a cowboy with a promise to keep and a heart big enough to save a dying stranger. He had given her a future when she thought she had none, given her fresh starts when she believed she had run out of chances. And in the end, that was what love was. It was seeing someone at their absolute worst and choosing to believe in their best. It was offering hope when there seemed to be none, offering comfort when there seemed to be no comfort to give. It was looking at someone who had nothing and seeing everything they could become, if only they had the chance. Quincy had given Penelope that chance, and she had taken it and run with it, building a life that exceeded even her wildest dreams. She had become more than she ever thought possible, not because she was special or chosen, but because someone had believed in her when she could not believe in herself. That was the gift he had given her, the one that mattered more than food or shelter or safety. He had given her the belief that she was worth saving, worth fighting for, worth loving. And once she believed that, once she truly accepted it, there was nothing she could not do. Their story ended the way all good love stories should, with two people who loved each other deeply and completely, surrounded by the family they had built and the life they had created. When Penelope Yates passed away at the age of 73, with Quincy holding her hand and their children gathered around her bed, her last words were simple and true. "Thank you for giving me a future. Thank you for showing me what love really means. Thank you for everything." And Quincy, who had loved her for 51 years and would love her for all the years he had left, smiled through his tears and whispered back, "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for being brave enough to survive. Thank you for being mine." He followed her 3 years later, his heart finally giving out on a cold winter morning. His last thought was of her, of the girl standing in the rain with a tin cup, of the way she had looked on their wedding day, of the life they had built together. And as he closed his eyes for the last time, he knew with absolute certainty that he had kept his promise to Thomas York. He had helped someone the way he had been helped, and in doing so, he had found the love of his life. The ranch passed to their children, and then to their grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But at the heart of it all, preserved in letters and memories and the stories told around dinner tables, was the tale of Penelope and Quincy, the woman who had been living on rainwater and borrowed time, and the cowboy who had given her a future and fresh starts. It was a story that reminded people that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. That love could bloom in the most unlikely places. That sometimes the universe sent you exactly what you needed, exactly when you needed it most. And that the simple act of showing compassion to a stranger could change not just their life, but your own, in ways you never could have imagined. The Yates family continued to take in those who needed help, honoring the legacy of their ancestors. The ranch became a symbol of hope and second chances, a place where people could find refuge from their pasts and begin to build their futures. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Quincy found Penelope in the rain, the family would gather at that spot by the old creek bed and tell the story again, making sure that future generations understood where they came from and what their name meant. Because Penelope Sutton Yates had not just survived, she had thrived. She had taken the gifts she had been given and multiplied them, spreading hope and love and compassion wherever she went. She had been a light in the darkness for so many people, just as Quincy had been a light for her. And that, in the end, was the true measure of a life well lived. Not in the wealth accumulated or the status achieved, but in the love shared and the lives touched. Penelope and Quincy Yates had touched countless lives, had changed their corner of the world for the better, and had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their love story was not perfect or easy or without struggle, but it was real, it was honest, it was true. And it proved that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them, when you are at your absolute lowest and certain there is no hope left. Because there is always hope. There are always fresh starts. There is always the possibility of a future, if you are brave enough to reach for it and lucky enough to find someone willing to help you claim it. Penelope Sutton had been living on rainwater and borrowed time, but Quincy Yates had given her so much more than mere survival. He had given her love, family, purpose, and joy. He had given her a reason to wake up every morning with a smile on her face and gratitude in her heart. He had given her a life worth living, and she, in turn, had given him the same. They had saved each other in all the ways that mattered, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting and true. Their story became legend in Park City, Utah, a reminder that even in the harsh reality of the Wild West, love could flourish and hope could triumph. The abandoned miner's shack where Quincy found Penelope eventually disappeared entirely, reclaimed by the earth and the weather. But a marker was placed there by their grandchildren, a simple stone with an inscription that read, "Here in the rain, 2 lives changed forever." Here, hope was born from desperation. Here, love began. And every year when the first snow fell in Park City, descendants of Penelope and Quincy Yates would make the pilgrimage to that spot and remember. They would remember the strength it took to survive, the courage it took to trust, and the power of a single act of compassion to change everything. The story of Penelope and Quincy became more than just a family history. It became a part of the town's identity, a reminder of the values that had built this community and sustained it through hard times. It was told in the boarding house that Mrs. Chen's descendants still ran, in the church where they had been married, in the school their children had attended. It became woven into the fabric of Park City itself, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary ways. A woman standing in the rain, A cowboy who looked back. A single decision to help a stranger. These small moments, these tiny choices, had rippled outward through time, touching hundreds of lives and shaping generations. It was a reminder that we never know how much our actions might matter, how much a single kindness might change someone's trajectory. Quincy Yates had kept his promise to Thomas York in ways he never could have imagined. He had not just helped someone who needed it. He had found his soulmate, built a family, and created a legacy that would endure for generations. And Penelope Sutton, the girl who thought her story was ending in a dried-up creek bed, had instead found that it was only just beginning. Their love had not been instant or easy. It had been built slowly, carefully, through shared experiences and mutual respect. It had been forged in the fires of hardship and tempered by joy. It had grown stronger with each passing year, deepening and maturing into something unshakable. And that was the final lesson of their story, perhaps the most important one. True love was not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up day after day, year after year. It was about choosing each other again and again, no matter what life threw at you. It was about being a partner in the truest sense, bearing burdens together and celebrating victories as one. Penelope had been living on rainwater and borrowed time, but Quincy had given her a future and fresh starts. And together, they had built something that transcended their individual stories, something that spoke to the best parts of human nature, our capacity for compassion, for love, for hope against all odds. Their story ended not with tragedy but with triumph, not with loneliness but with legacy, not with despair but with joy that echoed through generations. It was a story that proved that no matter how dark things might seem, no matter how impossible the circumstances, there is always the possibility of redemption, of love, of a better tomorrow. And it all started with a cowboy who looked back, who saw someone in need and decided to help, who gave a dying stranger a reason to live. Quincy Yates had given Penelope Sutton a future, and she had taken that gift and built something extraordinary with it. Together, they had created a love story for the ages, one that would be remembered and retold for as long as there were people to tell it. In the end, that was their greatest achievement, not the ranch they built or the children they raised or the lives they touched, but the story they created together. A story of hope and redemption, of second chances and the transformative power of love. A story that reminded everyone who heard it that even in the darkest times, there is always light to be found, if only you are brave enough to reach for it. Penelope Sutton Yates had been living on rainwater and borrowed time, but she died surrounded by love, having lived a life fuller and richer than she ever could have imagined. And Quincy Yates, the cowboy who gave her a future and fresh starts, had found his own future in the process, building a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their promises kept. They had fought for each other, loved each other, and built something beautiful together. And in doing so, they had proved that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them, when we open our hearts to strangers and offer compassion without expectation of return. The rain that fell on Park City, Utah continued to fall for generations, nourishing the earth and sustaining life. But it would never again be just rainwater to the descendants of Penelope and Quincy Yates. It would always be a reminder of where they came from, of the desperate girl with a tin cup and the compassionate cowboy who changed her life. It would always be a symbol of hope, of new beginnings, of the possibility that waits in every drop of rain. And that was the legacy they left behind, not just a family or a ranch or a story, but a reminder that we all have the power to change someone's life. We all have the capacity to offer hope when there seems to be none, to extend a hand when someone is falling, to give a future to someone who thinks they have none left. Penelope Sutton was living on rainwater and borrowed time, but Quincy Yates gave her a future and fresh starts. And in the end, that made all the difference.